Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today we'll tell you about some big changes happening in the UW college system, including the firing of the UW president. Then, in Capital Notes, we'll look at the potential impact President Trump's slipping approval ratings could have on the midterm elections.
It's pretty simple. The worse Donald Trump's numbers are, the better it is for Democrats. Now, we're still a long ways from November, don't forget that.
Plus, we'll look at how refugees living and working in the U.S. have been impacted by the federal government's changes to work authorizations.
When I lived in another country that I was born and raised, we refugees weren't even able to work properly at all. So now that we are here, we think that this is a freedom for us to actually live, but this is not.
All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. Public higher education in Wisconsin is going through a lot of changes right now, starting with a high-profile firing. On April 7th, the UW Board of Regents voted to fire UW President Jay Rothman after he refused to step down. Now the university system is tasked with replacing Rothman, while also finding a new chancellor for the flagship campus in Madison. WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel has more on what may have led to Rothman's firing and what comes next for UW.
It took just 32 minutes in a closed-door meeting for UW's board to fire the president of the universities of Wisconsin.
To terminate the appointment of Jay O. Rothman as president of the University of Wisconsin system, effective April 7th, 2020.
Jay Rothman was hired to lead the UW system in 2022 as an outsider. He was a partner at the Milwaukee-based law firm Foley & Lardner. He was paid $600,000 a year to lead the UW system's 13 campuses and 160,000 plus students. A week and a half before this meeting, the board reportedly gave the president an ultimatum: resign or be fired. Rothman refused to step down. In public statements, he said the board had given him no clear reason for the ultimatum. At the April 7th meeting, board president Amy Balgust didn't give a particular reason for firing Rothman. She cited his recent performance review without going into details. She also took a moment to say this.
President Rothman was not without notice, nor was the process sudden. The board has engaged with President Rothman in good faith discussions over the past several months.
Rothman has said publicly that he would not fight his termination in court. Following the termination, Republican legislators had questions for the regents. Bogost and Regent Timothy Nixon testified to the Senate Committee on Universities and Technical Colleges on April 9th. The Associated Press reported that Nixon listed a few issues that the board had with Rothman. Nixon said that Rothman had a lack of urgency in addressing AI. He also said Rothman was not fully aligned with the board and took credit for accomplishments that were part of a massive team effort. Amanda Nedweski is a Republican state assembly member from Kenosha who sits on the Higher Education Committee. She feels that the Board of Regents ousted Rothman to bring in a leader who aligns more with their preferred agenda, which she called progressive. All of the current regents were appointed by Democratic Governor Tony Evers.
How are they best serving the state of Wisconsin if they are making decisions about who is leading the system based on their political agendas? Jay was very committed to increasing participation in higher ed, not just to help the system survive, but because it's the right thing to build our workforce here in Wisconsin.
For others, Rothman's firing was less of a surprise. John Shelton is the president of AFT Wisconsin, which represents UW faculty.
You really have a scenario where UW system under Rothman ignored the voices of faculty and staff and made these political deals that set pretty devastating precedents on our campuses.
Shelton points to what he calls a failed negotiation between Rothman and the legislature in 2023. That resulted in a restructuring of DEI programs and positions across the university system. Rothman also ran afoul of some faculty last year when he introduced an intercampus credit transfer program in response to a new state law. That program included some hiring freezes, minimum teaching hours for professors, and a core curriculum requirement for all UW schools. Nedwesky and Republicans called those changes necessary accountability measures for the universities. Shelton and other campus leaders saw it differently.
That went far beyond what the law actually required. And I think, again, a lot of regents felt like they were in a position to basically make a deal in order to get this funding released that tied the hands of individual campuses.
Rothman's departure comes at a time when the flagship campus, UW-Madison, is also experiencing leadership changes. In January, Chancellor Jennifer Mnuchin announced that she would leave at the end of the semester to lead Columbia University. Shelton, who represents UW faculty, says that a double change in leadership creates uncertainty. But
our institutions, what makes them great are the people who do the work every day. No offense to either Mnuchin or Rothman, but I can't imagine there's one student who went to any of our institutions because they knew who the chancellor of Madison was or because they knew who the president of the UW system was.
Nedwesky, the representative from Pleasant Prairie, says the changes are indicative of a larger issue.
You're losing a chancellor. They've fired a president. The fact that they're sort of leaderless at the moment is reflective of the state of higher education in this state. It's almost a little bit chaotic, and who we trust to put at the helm here is going to be very critical to the system's survival.
That idea that these leadership changes will create chaos in the universities of Wisconsin is one I put to Barry Dornfeld. He's a principal and strategic advisor at CFAR, a change management consulting firm that works with higher education institutions. He says UW's situation is strange.
More typically, there's a fair amount of notice around a leader of a system or of a campus coming or going. When it happens suddenly like this, I think it can be challenging because there's not a lot of clarity about exactly why the change was made. But it does raise questions about why now? Why did that current or the outgoing leader leave? What might they have been lacking in terms of their capabilities or in terms of their actions? What's needed? Are there mismatches between campus leadership and governance? So a lot can be raised, by a sudden transition like this, and the uncertainty it creates, can be a challenge.
Rothman's departure has also highlighted tensions between the Republican-led legislature and the UW Board of Regents. I asked Dornfeld how that could affect the leadership transition.
Ultimately, there's more danger of them being less than helpful, and I think the whole politicization of higher education over the last couple of years has not been helpful for anyone, really, and particularly if we think about the purpose of higher ed, to serve our young people and to offer, world-class education in a way that few other countries and few other institutions can. So I think ultimately the politics doesn't help.
Either way, UW must begin a process to replace Rothman as he leaves with 3 months of severance payments. Vice President of University Relations Chris Patton is serving as the acting executive until an interim president is chosen. For Lake Effect, I'm WUWM education reporter Katherine Kokel.
WUWM is a service of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver in conversation with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. Hi there, J.R. Welcome back to Capital Notes.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So there was a national Marquette poll released last week. The number of voters who strongly approve of Republican President Donald Trump dropped to 17%, and the number of voters who strongly disapprove of him rose to 48%. Can you put this in context and explain how it might impact the November midterms?
Well, it's pretty simple. The worse Donald Trump's numbers are, the better it is for Democrats. Now, we're still a long ways from November, don't forget that. But in talking to people on the Capitol, there's a sense that, one, the party in power in the White House is almost always a drag on its candidates in a midterm election. And two, if Donald Trump is in the 30s for his job approval rating and gas prices are $4 come mid-October, Republicans are in real trouble. Now, 2018 was a midterm election with Trump in the White House, and you go back and look at those numbers, a Marquette poll of Wisconsin voters, and Trump got back into I think it was low to mid 40s, the last poll before the election. It was still a good night for Democrats. It wasn't a huge wipeout. If, though, you're seeing Trump in the 30s and people are still feeling happy about cost, that's a real problem, because the whole kind of crux of Trump's campaign or pitch for 2024 was, I can fix the affordability issue and I can fix immigration. You can argue about how immigration is going with terms of enforcement actions, if that's popular with people, but there's two ways about it. The war with Iran has driven up gas prices. People are not feeling relief at the grocery store or the pump, and so there's a real problem for Republicans on that affordability front.
And those top issues for voters in that poll were inflation and the cost of living, the U.S.-Israel war with Iran, and the economy. What are the key takeaways there?
It's been no mystery. People have been unhappy about how costs rising for several years now. Now, Democrats got a reprieve in 2022 from some of those issues because the Dobbs decision, which is the one from the U.S. Supreme Court, from the right to an abortion. That really motivated female voters, especially, who cared about abortion rights, and really changed the dynamic of that midterm election. If it hadn't been for Dobbs and some other things, Democrats would have had a very tough election cycle because of Joe Biden in the White House. Fast forward to now, what's the event that could happen between now and November that would be Dobbs-like for Republicans to shake off or to get through this malaise they're going through? Because it's not just Trump being underwater with voters. If you look at like all these indicators, from like voter enthusiasm to satisfaction with your own personal situation, it's not looking good for Republicans. The best thing for them is time. It's still late April. There's still some time. But in my conversations with people, one thing that's come through is, at what point do people have to start feeling better to have it really break through in the polls? And I've had people tell me Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, sometime, but it can't be like mid-October before interest rates drop and inflation drops for it to be good for Republicans. It has to happen sometime soon, really sooner rather than later.
It's the end of April. We still have about 6 months left until the midterms. All 99 Wisconsin Assembly seats and half of the state Senate, so about 17 seats, are up for grabs. And the maps are not as favorable to Republicans in the first place as in years past. Given this national climate and then what you're watching for in the state legislature, can you lay out the races to watch as Democrats try and flip the state Senate? Or, there's 4 of them, right?
Yep, in the Senate, there are 4 seats to really pay attention to. And all 4, Kamala Harris got more votes than Donald Trump in 2024. So that's not a great starting point for Republicans, especially because 24 was kind of a bad year for Democrats. So if you are now projecting a good year for Democrats, probably makes it a tougher climb. But you start in the Milwaukee suburbs. Brookfield, Rob Hutton, Republican, has retired, decided not to seek re-election. So we have a race there for his seat, the Milwaukee suburbs. Van Wangard, Republican from Racine, he's retiring, not seeking re-election. Race for his district that runs from kind of Racine on Lake Michigan, juts out in the county and goes north into Milwaukee County. Go west, we have Senator Howard Markline, Republican, co-chair of the Finance Committee. His southwestern Wisconsin seat is one that's really much in play. And then you go up to the Eau Claire area, and Jeff Smith, a Democrat from Brunswick, he's the one kind of true pickup opportunity for Republicans. So Republicans started this session with an 1850 majority. They got to keep at least 2 of those seats to hold on. They had a good candidate against Jeff Smith in Senator Jesse James, who was drawn into a different district from the one he lived in for years on the new map. So he was elected the 22nd, was drawn into the 31st, the map, so he got a temporary residence in his district to keep representing it. He's going to run against Smith, but he dropped his bid last week. That makes it tougher. Republicans only have 1 incumbent in those 4 seats they're trying to defend, or 4 seats they're trying to contest. That's not great for them in this environment. In the Assembly, there are, depending who you talk to, 10 dozen seats that are going to be competitive. It just depends, is there a wave? If there is, how high is it? But there really is a narrow path for Democrats in the Assembly because they really did pick up a lot of seats in 2024. They're now down 54-45. They've got to flip seats like Dean Coffert Neenah, a Republican who was in the legislature before, left when he became mayor of Neenah, came back and ran above the top of the ticket. So we haven't heard from Dean yet if he's going to run, but that's one that Democrats would have to win to give a path majority. Jesse Rodriguez, Milwaukee suburbs, another one who ran above the top of the ticket. She would have, she doesn't know if she's going to run yet, but Democrats would have to win that seat to have a realistic path to majority. Todd Novak, Republican from Dodgeville, another one where does better than the top of the ticket. So there are opportunities there for Republicans to rise above what's going on nationally, but it's not easy. So you start with those three, then you've got to go look at Ben Franklin up in Green Bay, Republican as a freshman. That was a narrow race from 2024. And for Democrats, you got to start thinking, okay, they've got to protect Ryan Spotty in Green Bay, who nearly won his race. Steve Doyle in Alaska, who won a seat that Donald Trump also took more votes than Kamala Harris. So again, there's a path there for Democrats in the Assembly, but it's not very wide unless there's that big wave, right? The bigger the wave is, the better the chance for the Democrats to take control of the Assembly.
This is Capital Notes. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross of WisPolitics.com. Okay, J.R., we were just talking about the legislature. Moving on to the race for governor in Wisconsin. Last week, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reported on some comments from Democratic candidate and current Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez. She was recorded saying at a Democratic event that if she was elected, she'd craft her first state budget, quote, behind a curtain. Can you remind people about how the budget process usually works and basically how what she's proposing is different? And do you think it was a political misstep?
Well, the reality is the budget is almost always crafted behind closed doors. I have been covering the Capitol for 26 years. I have yet to cover an honest to goodness negotiation in public. Now, there is a public process. Governors often have public hearings where they take input from people at around the state. There's a joint finance committee which does public hearings of the budget, then does public votes. But everything actually done in the budget is done in private. It's just the way it is. I've not seen any governor call the media in to watch him negotiate with a stakeholder or a lawmaker about what he or she wants with the budget. It doesn't exist. That said, this is not a great look for Rodriguez because part of a pattern emerging where she's kind of said some things that have raised eyebrows. And part of it is maybe being a little bit naive about the process. She was speaking in this case to some Democrats in Rock County. If you're a public official, you always assume you're being taped, that you're being watched, even in private. And two, never trust that it's because you're in front of people who are in your party that they're going to keep what you say secret, because there are people in that room who like your primary opponents. So things are going to get out. Let's go. A little bit of a misstep. It might raise some questions about her viability at some point. But the bigger thing for all these folks running for governor on the Democratic side is, where's the money going to come from? What outside group or groups is going to spend for you? We go through the list of everybody, and Mandela Barnes has the highest name ID. Okay, so how do you catch them? You catch them with money. And looking at the finance reports from January, nobody raised enough money for a sustained, significant media buy for months on end leading up to the primary in August. So where do you get help? Well, either you have to get really up your fundraising, which I've heard from campaigns and others that it's a slog because it's such a wide open field, or two, you've got some backers who go to an outside group and they do ads for you, and that can help immensely. Kelda Roy's got endorsed by WEAC, States Overseas Teachers Union. That should help her somewhat, but WEAC isn't a financial 800-pound gorilla like it used to be back 25 years ago. So what can WEAC do? Does Missy Hughes or Joel Brennan or Francesca Hong, do they have an outside group to help them between now and the primary? Because that's going to be required. And now the flip side is, even if you get help, what if Mandela Barnes gets more help? Again, remember, he starts with a name ID advantage. You can't just catch him. You have to overtake him. And if he has somebody spending for him or he can spend enough on his own, it makes it hard to catch him, right? So that's what we're really watching. Yes, this is a gaffe by Rodriguez. It's not a great look. You never admit in public you do things in secret. But really, the thing that we're watching for more than anything else is, where's the money going to come from? When's it going to start? Rodriguez has said she has $4.5 million in backing roughly. Now, the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association in the fall said to do $2 million in independent expenditures for her. She has said she has commitments from other donors to groups that do 2.5 in her behalf. Well, that's a lot of money, but when's it going to start? If there's that much really there, you would think mid-May, early June, we would see something. If we don't, you got to start wondering, where's that help coming from and when's it going to start?
And you were talking about the headwinds for Republicans nationally and how that's affecting people locally. But in that race for governor, there's multiple candidates. There's going to be a fairly large Democratic primary in August. And yet the GOP has kind of coalesced around one candidate, Congressman Tom Tiffany. How is that going to factor into, Republicans and Democrats' chances in November?
Right. Tiffany has the opportunity to kind of get donors to rally around him. Now, there's this continuous scuttlebutt about Tommy Thompson and whether he's interested in running again, and it's kind of like this open thing running in Madison of like, will he or won't he? We've seen this dance with Tommy before where he has talked about wanting to run, but in the end decided not to. All that said, Tiffany has the opportunity to kind of get the GOP coalition behind him to focus on his, general election message. He did an ad recently introducing himself to people as this like boat captain and girl dad who likes old fashions, trying to humanize him a little bit. So it's a great opportunity for him to focus on that. Or Democrats, they don't know who their nominee is going to be. They don't know if that nominee is going to be bruised and battered after the primary. Is it going to get ugly? How much money that nominee have? So even though there are advantages for Democrats nationally with the environment, if a candidate emerges from that primary who has got electability problems, that helps Tiffany. If that candidate emerges has financial problems, it helps Tiffany. So there are avenues there, but you can also bet that national Democrats are preparing for that scenario where whoever wins the nomination is broke on August 12th, the day after the primary, and will come with an infusion of cash get up on the air to help that person to make sure that there isn't a window where Republicans beat up the Democratic nominee unanswered heading into the general election.
Finally, I wanted to ask you about something very specific to last week. The Wisconsin Department of Justice announced that they're suing Polymarket and others. I think it's the first state to sue over alleged illegal sports betting. Attorney General Josh Kaul says that the companies are disguising the sports betting they facilitate on their online platform as event contracts, which pay out just like ordinary bets based on the odds of sports-related outcomes. What do we need to know here? Anything?
Well, it's be interesting how it plays out. And then, two, don't forget the backdrop of all this is we are on the edge of maybe having online gaming legalized in Wisconsin. The bill passed out of the legislature, signed by the governor, that would change the definition of a bet to allow an online wager to be placed. Now Evers has to negotiate compacts with the Native American tribes to allow that to operate. You have to have your servers on tribal lands, and tribes have to offer it. So there's going to be a changing landscape for online gaming in Wisconsin soon if all signs that we're seeing continue that the governors are working on a deal with the tribes about allowing that, and they embrace that opportunity.
How would that intersect with these national companies and versus the tribes being able to do online gaming?
Essentially, the whole crux is that you can't offer online gaming in Wisconsin unless you're a tribe. That would be the bottom line. Now, there are going to be lawsuits about this. The Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty has already said it's going to sue. It thinks that this expansion is illegal. So watch how that plays out in the courts. But it's illegal right now to offer online bet in Wisconsin, period. This move by lawmakers and the governor for online gaming with the tribes is a way around that because it would involve compacts, tribal lands, and those kinds of things.
Interesting. And do you think that the tribes could ever negotiate with a company like Polymarket or something?
Good question. There's been some question about whether they would partner and how that would work. So that's all to be determined as far as I know.
All right. Well, thanks for this background, JR. And as always, thanks for joining me on Capital Notes.
Anytime.
Just like Capital Notes, Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen when you like. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. Then subscribe, download, and listen on demand. In about 15 minutes, we'll tell you about some recent restaurant closures and openings in the Milwaukee area. But first, we'll look at how refugees working in the U.S. have been impacted by the federal government's changes to work authorization. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. In January, the Trump administration paused the visa process for people from 75 countries. It left many refugees who already live here, mainly from African, Asian, and Latin American countries, without a clear path to citizenship. It also caused a lot of confusion for companies who employ refugees. Since work authorizations were also paused, people didn't know what was and wasn't legal. Some companies didn't know that refugees are allowed to work in the U.S., even without those documents. So a lot of refugees lost their jobs. Katie Lewis and Bibi Noor Mohammed work with refugees at Milwaukee's Community Center for Immigrants. They've been helping clients get their jobs back amid the confusion. Here they are speaking with WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez.
Refugees come here with nothing. They've left their home country. They've left all their belongings. They've been living in a third country, sometimes up to decades, waiting to get resettled. A lot of times they're having to work under the table. They don't have much money. They don't have much savings. And then they come here, and America's not a cheap place to live. So they've got to be able to work, and even like a few weeks off of work, because they have to come to us and get an I-9 letter and get the documents together that they need to show an employer, can put significant strain on these families and their financial resources and being able to put even just like food on the table, pay their rent.
I mean, I myself was a refugee before. So when I lived in another country that I was born and raised, we refugees weren't even able to work properly at all. So now that we are here, we think that this is a freedom for us to actually live, but this is not. It's not. It's very hard. It's very difficult for these refugees. They're scared. Honestly, they're more scared now that they're here. It's worse than what they have actually experienced before.
Yeah, well, Bibi was even bringing up earlier when we were talking about how refugees right now, the fear and that the trauma that they've gone through to like leave the persecution they were facing in their home countries, even the trauma from the discrimination they felt in these third countries. And now being here, they thought, okay, I'm finally safe. And they have like no access to their rights. Refugees are getting detained unlawfully. They're not able to get their green cards. They're not able to get citizenship right now. And it's feeling worse for them than what they've all these other things that they've been through.
So at Community Center for Immigrants, you're really, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, service providers of sorts for immigrants, new arrivals, and refugees. And something that you've taken on is helping people who've lost their job. We're talking about work authorization or folks that are looking to get employment, securing their employment. Can you help me understand and walk me through, from a client's point of view, where they're getting hung up or what the hang up has been for them, what the issues they're bringing to you have been?
Well, I think a big part of it, like as Bibi was discussing, is that because HRs don't always know the different documents, they're like, I want a work authorization card, I want a green card. But refugees right now can't get a new work authorization because they're not approving any application for them, and they can't get a green card. So they are also very confused by these complex systems and all the different documents they have, and they don't really know which ones they're supposed to show. There's normally a language barrier. They may not even necessarily have interpreters on site to guide them through this. So they might just be getting these warning letters in English or a warning email, and they might not even understand it. And then all of a sudden they're notified that they're suspended. And that's when they kind of come to us frantic, because there is not any good communication in their own language, not enough advocacy on the employer's part to make sure that they understand what's going on. So they're just frantic because now they're in this state of like, I can't work, I don't have any money, I need to get my job back as soon as possible. And on top of that, typically refugee resettlement providers would be helping with these kind of issues, but they've lost so much funding as well that their organizations have had to be cut back. So that's where we partner with them and also with Catholic Charities, because it's really taken a team effort between us service providers to be supporting people and saying like, hey, we've got this really helpful I-9 letter. Here's a copy that you can sort of template in your own form as well. That it's really taking all this teamwork to meet the needs.
Thinking of that teamwork, I'm thinking of when we were talking, Bibi, about how everything is so new. And I mean, just, from the language to the food, like everything, this is a whole new world. And these folks that you're representing have access to advocates or people who can kind of like help with the I-9 letters and help advocate for them. I'm curious what happens to the folks that don't have access to your services or to the team that's in play, and what are you hearing from them? Or is it just that they lose their job and then what?
Yeah. We actually have one client who hadn't contacted me when she had lost her job, and she just thought she wasn't able to work. So her family has been suffering from a lot of like financial strain. They've moved houses a lot. They had to move back in with their parents. And then when we were talking and she told me what happened, I was like, wait, what? No, like you have this. So we actually put on back in January a big open house with the Burmese Rohingya community of Wisconsin. We did a presentation translated into both Burmese and Rohingya. And one of the biggest topics, we were just talking about the green card pause, but one of the biggest topics that came up were people didn't realize that, oh, I can't lose my job over the fact that I don't have my green card yet and then my work authorization. And we had to really just keep hitting home with that of like, you are allowed to work, even with that being expired. It's just an extra little piece you need, but like you're allowed to work. And there's just so much confusion out there in the community.
It's incredibly difficult for HR to keep up, and depending on who you go to, whether it's HR or a client's employer, they may have a very different read of a situation because, as we were talking about, things are changing so quickly that if you're not keeping an eye on policy things and policy changes around immigration and rights and laws for refugees, things may change. And I know it's tough for a service provider to keep up. It's tough for a reporter to keep up. But what has it been like over the past year and a half to advocate for your clients, whether it's for their employers, whether it's other services that they should have? What has it been like as a service provider to kind of keep up with everything that's been changing?
It's been really tough to keep up with everything, and it's actually meant we've had to take less clients and have a wait list and have longer times before people can get in, because before refugees could get their green cards. It was finally getting caught up after the COVID backlogs, and people are getting their green cards in about 6 months. So we could just we helped almost over 900 people in 1 year in 2024. And then last year, those numbers dropped down to about 800. And this year, we'll be lucky if we hit like 500, because we really have to slow down and keep adjusting our programming to meet the current needs of what's been going on. And it just means that, again, it's just creating a larger gap in these legal services that there's going to be less providers. Providers are having to do more screening. Providers are having to do more advocacy. We're normally just doing affirmative work, meaning we're helping people get green cards, we're helping people get citizenship, but now we're having to think about defensive strategies because refugees are getting detained in Minnesota. A Rohingya man who's a refugee got killed in New York a few weeks ago, and he's blind, and ICE just left him to die on the side of the road, and that's exactly what happened to him. So it's so hard to do our jobs and to help the communities and to keep up the steam of what we had because we're constantly having to shift and adjust and protect.
So what are you watching now?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing that we're watching is refugee detention because, again, refugees, they've waited decades to come here on a visa. You know, we hear this famous talking line of come here the right way. It's hard to find another immigrant group that totally has come here the right way besides refugees. They've been vetted, they've been interviewed multiple times, they've run background checks on them, and then they finally get resettled here. But after a year, they have a path to a green card, but they have to apply for it again to show that they're living and they're not just going to move to a different country. And so now USCIS and Trump's administration said, okay, well, at 1 year, which is when they're supposed to apply, if they don't have a green card by that 1 year date, we can detain them and re-question them and see, maybe they came here fraudulently and they are actually not refugees. And thankfully, it looks like the courts are siding against the Trump administration for that, but they detained over 100 refugees in Minneapolis, shipped them off to Texas within less than 24 hours, so they didn't even have connection to their legal representatives. And then on top of that, they took away all their identity documents. So even when they were released from ICE custody, all these very important documents that they only have one copy of that's very difficult to get, they took, and they don't even have.
A lot of my clients are very scared of the fact that, I didn't get my green cards. What are they going to do? What if I get arrested? Who am I supposed to contact? What am I supposed to do? All these questions that they ask me. sometimes we have answer to that, sometimes we don't have answer to that, because we don't even know how to prevent, how to prevent our clients getting detained by ICE, even though they came here legally.
That was Caitlin Lewis and Bibi Noor Mohammed from Milwaukee's Community Center for Immigrants. They spoke with WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez. You can hear more stories like this in WUWM's Status Pending podcast. Find it wherever you like to listen. Still to come, some big things are happening in Milwaukee's restaurant scene. We'll take a look next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. 2026 is shaping up to be a pivotal year for a lot of Milwaukee restaurants. Aside from the Michelin Committee announcing its presence in the city, there are a lot of new places opening throughout the area, with new and some interesting concepts. But there are also a lot of restaurants that are struggling, with higher prices for food and rent. And even some new and popular spots are having to close their doors. Lori Frederick is the dining editor for On Milwaukee, and she's been keeping track of what's happening in Milwaukee's food scene. She joins me now to talk about it. Lori, thank you so much for being here on Lake Effect.
Always a pleasure, Joy.
I am going to start with a closing that I was really surprised by. Violetta's Polish restaurant. It's not that old of a restaurant, and I think it's a concept that a lot of people were excited about. What exactly happened?
So I don't have all the facts on this because I haven't really had a chance to talk to the owners. It's been really busy. But I'm getting the sense, based on what I've read online and what I've gathered from comments that the owners have made, that the restaurant wasn't as busy as they had hoped. So what happened here, they will be closing on April 26th, and they've been bought out by basically a brunch chain that had been eyeing that space in Oak Creek. And it's an attractive, accessible location, and I have a feeling that the buyout was attractive because they just weren't getting the traffic, into the locally owned restaurant that they hoped to get. And unfortunately, this has kind of been the story with the Polish eateries, here in Milwaukee. Even in Chicago, you'll hear that story from Polish restaurant owners. This is the sort of food that's really, really attractive to people, during the winter months, and then not so attractive to them during the summer months. It was kind of a concern when I talked to the Barzaks, when they were opening the restaurant, like, is this going to be a seasonal thing? People are really, really excited about it, but, we hit challenging economic times. Maybe people aren't going out to dinner quite as often. So what we say verbally that we love and we want to see around, maybe we're not supporting it quite in the same way.
Yeah. Now, they will still have the deli. Is that right?
Yes, and the messaging is that you can find a lot of the same things that were at the restaurant at the deli. So I'm eager to get more information.
Nice. Another newer spot that we are seeing closing now, Gather Bakehouse. I was surprised in part because there have been a few restaurants, I think, or at least a couple in this space after Canfora Bakery had been there quite a while. And it seems like since Canfora closed, it's been hard to make something work in this space.
Yeah. It seems like they've been having a lot of trouble, like keeping people in the space. And they've been bakeries. And what's sad about this is that Gather Bakehouse was having, some issues initially, and they seem to have really met their stride here, and they were doing well. They were starting to actually make money. They were popular. Their ham and rolls on Sundays was really popular. But according to Brittany, they're having some equipment failure, and they're also having some issues in negotiating how to deal with those equipment failures with the landlord. And they've been unable to negotiate a good solution. And she's like, we can't operate under the circumstances. And so we're just going to either have to find a new place to be, or we're just going to have to close. She said she hopes they can find a new location so that they can start up again. But that's a really unfortunate circumstance for a bakery that's just starting to really get going. So yeah, sad closure when you're doing well and it's bad timing.
Hopefully we'll see them in another location in the Milwaukee area.
Yeah.
Now, another spot I was surprised by, Fixture Pizza. As a Southsider, I've been there many times. It's always seemed pretty busy. Yeah. Why have they decided to close?
Well, and this was a sudden closure. And this was a closure where there was suddenly a note on the door and a message on the answering machine that basically said, we are closed indefinitely. And it appears to be related to some financial issues, including some unpaid taxes. I don't know a lot of detail about that. I didn't go scrummaging around in that business. But it appears that they have some money that is owed. And until that is rectified, there really wasn't a way for them to keep going on. I think the federal government maybe shut them down, is one of the stories that I heard. And it sounded as if there was hope that they could come back, but it has been since February, so that apparently has not been solved yet. But there is also no sign on the building that anyone else is going in. So that is a wait-and-see sort of a situation. There are a lot of people hoping that Fixture will come back. They were a very popular concept, and I don't think the closure was for lack of business. So.
Now, the final spot we're going to talk about, actually, this is another spot that maybe will move to a new location. They are an older spot in Brookfield. It's Cafe Manna, is that right?
Cafe Manna. Mm-hmm.
Manna, a fully vegan restaurant in Brookfield. To remain there for 18 years is very impressive.
Yeah, and Cafe Manna was they were pioneers in terms of they were among the first fully vegan restaurants. They were dealing in raw dishes before anyone was even thinking about that. They were very sustainable in a time when people weren't worried about that. So they tread a lot of new territory. They also became a favorite for folks who were just looking for vegetable-forward meals. And they were very, very good at what they did. But even though the owners have decided it was time for them to end their time running a restaurant, the chef did indicate that he was looking for a new place to continue his journey. So there may be a new life for something. It may or may not be called Cafe Manna, but for people who are interested, that may be a story that keeps going.
Nice. Now, on the bright side, many openings that have been happening here in Milwaukee. Yes. We have some really fun and unusual spots that have opened or are about to open. One that I think has gotten a lot of press is Sushi Bay. That's a conveyor belt sushi restaurant. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first time we've seen a spot like this in Milwaukee.
It is. And that's remarkable considering that conveyor belt sushi has been around literally since the 60s and 70s. Now, granted, that was in Japan. This is a second location for Sushi Bay, but the first here. It's generated a lot of excitement. I think it's a fun concept. You can either participate in the conveyor belt sushi, which is basically like you take a seat. There is a conveyor belt that comes past that has various dishes that are in little plastic containers, and they're labeled with little different colors, so you know what the price is before you grab them. So you grab them one at a time. There's a little bit of etiquette here. You're only supposed to grab one thing at a time. Grab it, eat it, and take them one at a time. It's kind of like the all-you-can-eat concept where you don't grab too much because you want to be able to eat it all. Or if you don't feel like dealing with the conveyor belt, they also do have full service sushi with a wait staff. So you have a choice here. It's a fairly large space because it was a pizza restaurant before. That closed kind of, I think, right before the pandemic. So that space has been empty for some time. So, it's really, really nice to see something on that corner of Water Street and right on the MyEd campus.
Always good to get an empty space filled with a new restaurant.
Absolutely.
Now, the next restaurant we're going to talk about, I think we've talked about them previously, Cassis. There has been a lot of excitement around this space, and I think it's filling a niche that has a lot of fans, French cuisine.
Sure. This has been a really, really highly anticipated restaurant. It's been talked about for a really long time. It was delayed as far as opening, so there was a lot of talk, a lot of anticipation. I hope it's not like that movie that gets talked about for so long that when you go, it's not quite what you expect. But Cassis did open. I have been there. It is a beautiful restaurant. It is right in the 3rd Ward on the corner of St. Paul and Water Street. So it has beautiful river views. I think it's going to be a wonderful restaurant to go to in the summer because they will have a beautiful riverfront patio. It is a French concept, and it is a little bit higher end feeling, but it's unique in the sense that it merges traditional French food with Midwestern ingredients, and there's a little bit of a twist there, but that's because it's owned by Kyle Nall and his wife, and that's kind of his trademark. The restaurant is kind of casual in a sense. I will say that it was built to be fun. So the bar has a noise level that may not be appealing to everyone. It is not a place to go if you want a super quiet environment, especially at the bar. Other places in the restaurant were created to be slightly quieter, but I don't think you're going to find anywhere that is like that really, really quiet, meditative sort of space to have a private conversation.
The space itself has so much light in it,
Yes.
just based on the amount of windows and the location of it, that I feel like once you walk in, it probably feels a bit lively already.
It does, yeah. It's the light. It has beautiful tile work. It's just, I don't know. And they are now open. Initially, they opened for dinner. They are now open for lunch. And we are expecting that they will open for brunch soon.
So looking at another space that's been open for quite a while at this point, the former Rumpus Room, it seems it will be finally getting a new tenant, and it's a less typical concept for Milwaukee, a European steakhouse. What does that mean exactly?
So there's not a ton of difference, right? I mean, we're still talking about a restaurant that serves steak, but American steakhouses typically emphasize, right, large cuts of meat and bold flavors. And European steakhouses really are showcasing, like, premium cuts of beef. A lot of times they're local. They're usually smaller portions. A lot of times they're, like, scratch-made sauces and different things. So it's just a slightly different perspective on the usual steakhouse. They're really showcasing this premium meat. And while a lot of times, and especially in the Midwest, we're looking at how big of a steak, can we find, tomahawk steaks and ribeye steaks, and this is going to be more about, this is a very, very high quality piece of meat. I think that's the direction that they're going to go if they're kind of true to that concept. We don't know much about this. The interior is being designed by the same person that they worked with, Jay Frank of Jay Frank Design. This is the same person they worked with to design Commodore.
We should say this is Bartolotta.
This is a Bartolotta restaurant. Yes, we shouldn't take that for granted. So the Rumpus Room, this is in the old Rumpus Room space on Water Street, also on Water Street. So all these vacant spaces on Water Street are becoming re-inhabited again, which is good to see. And the Bartolotas have kept this space all this time because Rumpus Room closed during the pandemic when all the other restaurants closed, and it just has never reopened. And there's been a lot of question on what will go in here. Now the question has been answered that it will be this European steakhouse. There's still a lot of questions about what that means. People are excited to have a restaurant there again because it's right in the middle of the theater and entertainment district. So it will be a place that people rely on for dinners, before shows, before performances. Yeah.
Well, and an exciting time to be on Water Street, it seems.
So it does seem, definitely.
Well, Lori, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect, sharing your work, and I look forward to trying some great food.
Likewise. Thank you.
Lori Frederick is the dining editor for On Milwaukee. At WUWM.com, you can find some of our previous conversations about Milwaukee area restaurants. And that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joy Powers. If you ever miss Lake Effect, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you want to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll visit an art center in Mineral Point and learn about the thriving art scene there in a new Wandering Wisconsin. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.